Victor Hugo was right when he said there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. Yes, the idea of freedom, liberty, and justice for all. Yes, that was the idea, but I declare that now is the time. And if America is going to have a chance at living out the true meaning of its creed, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, then we cannot afford for this nation or its leaders to have selective ambition.
Welcome to the Policy Lowdown, a podcast from the Maryland Center on Economic Policy, offering straight talk on the policies that matter most to Maryland communities. I'm your host, Kevin Slayton, and today we're focusing on one of the most important things we do together as a community, and that's educating our kids to set up the next generation for success. I'm pleased to welcome two outstanding guests today, the Executive Director of Strong Schools Maryland, Ms. Shamoyia Gardiner, and my colleague, co-worker, Chris Meyer, who's a research analyst with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. Shamoyia, please tell us a little bit more about yourself and the work Strong Schools Maryland is doing across our great state.
Hi, Kevin,
Hello.
and thank you for the introduction. I am Shamoyia Gardiner, Executive Director of Strong Schools Maryland. We came about in 2016 in direct response to the formation of the Kirwan Commission and spent several years fighting for the passage of the blueprint for Maryland's future while rallying up 30,000 Marylanders to do it with us. Since I've become Executive Director, we have shifted to the monitoring of the implementation of the blueprint, and that is where our work is today.
And Chris, our listeners got to hear a little bit in the last episode about the work the Maryland Center on Economic Policy does in general, but can you talk a bit about your background and what you focus on?
Hi, Kevin and Shamoyia. It's great to be talking with you today. So I've been a research analyst at the center since 2016, and I love this job because it lets me be a giant nerd while also working to make our economy more just and make Maryland a better place to live. I work in a few different policy areas, but education is one of my main focuses. One of my first projects here was to look at school funding equity, and I actually joined just a few months before the Kirwan Commission was formed. So I really had the joy of witnessing the entire process of that through implementation of the blueprint last year.
In 2021, the Maryland General Assembly overrode Governor Hogan's veto to pass the blueprint for Maryland's future, a comprehensive bill that both overhauled how we approach providing a great education to every child in Maryland, and it also provided billions in new funding to implement those improvements. Chris, can you lay some background work for us? What challenges were Maryland students and schools facing in the years leading up to the blueprint? And how is the blueprint supposed to address these challenges?
Sure. So Maryland has actually tried a comprehensive education funding reform once before in the early 2000s. And they made a lot of progress. Wasn't perfect, but by 2008, they were doing reasonably well. And then the Great Recession came, and over several years, the state essentially chipped away at school funding. So by 2015, only 6 school districts in the state were fully funded. And that didn't change until the last few years leading up to the blueprint. More than half of Black students in the state were going to school in a substantially underfunded district, by which I mean the district was underfunded by at least 15% compared to the state's official standards at the time. In comparison, only about 1 in 10 white students were going to school in a district that deeply underfunded. And so the blueprint is going to do a lot of great things for Maryland schools. Primarily, it's a major investment to rebuild our support for public schools throughout the state. And it's targeted to the schools that need support the most. One of the most promising new parts of the blueprint is what's called concentrated poverty funding. So we know that kids who grow up in low-income households, and even more so in low-income neighborhoods, face a huge array of barriers that get in the way of their education. One of the most important being just daily anxiety day after day that actually affects their health. It shows up in blood work, and it makes it harder to learn. And so that concentrated poverty funding is going to give schools in those areas more resources to address those barriers and create opportunity. The blueprint focuses on a number of proven reforms, things like expanded pre-kindergarten, bringing teacher salaries up to the level of comparable professions, which will make it easier to actually recruit and retain teachers in the state, shoring up our support for special education and students' mental health, and strengthening our investments in high-quality career and technical education. The one thing I would say about the blueprint is it's a long implementation period. We won't actually be fully funding it until 2030 or later. So change is not going to happen overnight, and we're definitely expecting to see results in terms of better outcomes, better achievement, but those are going to take a few years to actually materialize.
Excellent. Another question, Chris, comes to mind. As the state will change the way its budget process moves in Annapolis now, just real quick, will that have any impact on the formula?
It could. It's hard to say. So a little bit of historical background. Maryland has for a long time had one of the most governor-centric budget processes in the nation, which means that if the governor chose to underfund schools, with some exceptions, there was very little that the legislature could do about it. Starting next year, we'll have a more balanced budget process, which means essentially that the legislature will be able to ensure that schools are more fully funded, even if the governor doesn't try to do that. So it's possible that we could see that having a positive impact.
So this past school year was the first since the blueprint passed. As Chris said, the improvements in schools might not happen overnight, but school districts are seeing more state funds. Shamoyia, how are things going, and what are you hearing from parents and educators and students with your work?
So I want to start with what is going well. Across the state, and especially in places like Baltimore City that have experienced education funding debts for way too long, we are seeing blueprint dollars flowing. Teachers and principals who are friends of mine are texting me, that extra $2 million y'all were talking about in 2017, it's in our budgets now. We've got community schools rolling out across the state. If you're not familiar with the strategy, community schools offer wraparound services at the school building and integrate partnerships with parents, families, community members, associations, faith institutions, and more, all to ensure that students have what they need to succeed academically. This upcoming school year, Maryland will have more than 360 community schools across the state, which is great. There is a lot of power and a lot of opportunity in blueprint implementation so far. We're also seeing the expansion of Judy Centers and Patty Centers, which support our youngest learners. And we are also, of course, looking forward in the next couple of years to the statewide starting teacher salary increase to $60,000 a year. Now, not everything is sunny. Unfortunately, there have been complications with the implementation of the blueprint that were preceded by the COVID-19 pandemic, which still rages on. At the most technical levels, the COVID-19 pandemic has created room for the veto of the blueprint after it was initially passed in 2020, which meant that a very finely tuned timeline got put out of whack. We had to pass another bill, House Bill 1372, and then just one more this last legislative session to put the implementation timeline back on track. That means that measures of accountability, programs, reports, and things of these nature were delayed. And that means that the overall intended outcome of the blueprint, that vision of world-class schools that we're trying to get to, potentially hung in the balance. Now, earlier this winter, we put out an updated return on investment report that shows the increases in funding from the federal government caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the choices the Maryland General Assembly made in the last couple of legislative sessions, has actually created the platform for the blueprint to succeed with even more vigor than we initially intended. We're starting to expect to see economic returns on a more educated and qualified and frankly better served student body yield dividends for Maryland at least a year earlier than our initial projections. So even though the COVID-19 pandemic has stymied some things, we are looking forward to overall implementation and think that there is a really strong path forward for all of our school communities, regardless of the concerns that we're experiencing today.
Passing the blueprint was a really powerful policy change that will benefit an entire generation. But as people who care about policies that support a great education for every child, I suspect you also have some thoughts, Chris, about what more it is that the state can do. What other ways can Maryland better support our children?
Absolutely. So one of the first things is to make sure that we faithfully implement the blueprint. As I said before, we did this before. We were doing pretty well. And then when financially things got tough, we turned back on our promises. So we have to make sure that we keep funding schools the way that we promised that we would. Part of which ensures that requires ensuring that our revenue system is effective and equitable. But beyond that, one of the big things that gets in the way of students doing well at school is that anxiety and stress that comes from growing up in poverty and in a low-income neighborhood. And if you don't fix that, there's only so much that just funding schools can do. So one way that we can support families' economic security is through tax credits for working families, such as the child tax credit, which Maryland recently created in 2021, which gives essentially cash payments to certain families with children to make sure that they actually are able to make ends meet. So expanding that both to more families and to provide stronger payments, bigger payments, would do a lot to actually reduce that physiologically taxing stress that makes it harder for kids to do well in school. Another tax credit for working families that can make a big difference is the Earned Income Tax Credit, or EITC. So we've made some major improvements in it over the years, making sure that taxpayers who don't have a social security number are able to get it, improving it for workers without children. But there's still more work to do to make sure that it's providing as much support as possible to all families. Other things that we can do would be on focusing on youth mental health. We have recent data showing that about 1 in 8 children in Maryland are experiencing depression or anxiety. So addressing the root causes of that with economic security is important, but also making sure that kids have someone to talk to, are able to get treatment for mental health is super important and will help the blueprint reforms succeed. Along similar lines, we should be expanding school meals programs to make sure that kids are actually able to learn because they're not hungry. That means lunch, that means breakfast, that means making sure that as many kids as possible are able to get the food they need without administrative barriers, filling out complicated forms, or facing the risk of school lunch debt. And then finally, we should ensure that parents can afford high-quality childcare for the years before public pre-K programs are available. We've seen, especially during the pandemic, how childcare can be such a barrier to economic opportunity, both for parents, and can make it harder for kids to grow up in a safe and enriching environment.
Shamoyia, what would you add to that list?
One of the things I think is very critical is that we recognize that this moment means we have to re-envision what public education is. If schools are being run in the future in a way that is not the same as they were being run when I was in school or when my mother was in school, that is okay. The complex needs of our students must be addressed. And so I'm really hoping that every Marylander considers what it is that we're looking for in public education. We want a system that is going to serve all students fairly. We're looking for equitable outcomes. We want everyone to succeed and be ready to make choices, not be forced into, but to actually make choices about what is going to happen in the next stages of their lives. We're looking to grow people into careers and passion so that they are excited on a day-to-day basis to do what it is they love and contribute to our overall collective well-being. And when we think about public education that way, I think we can step back and recognize that some of these things we're fighting over are not necessarily in alignment with that vision. The blueprint, however, remains an opportunity for us to do better, to envision school as more than just K-12, but really starting at a prenatal level, investing in services for families, especially for families with young children, especially for those who may be new to Maryland, who may be new to acquiring English as a first language, or for families with children who are experiencing developmental delays as they grow. We're envisioning a public education system here that works for everyone and doesn't end once you graduate, actually sets you up to make choices, to have certifications in an apprenticeship field of your choosing, to set students on a career path, to create opportunities for dual enrollment and early college opportunities. One of the things that is vital in order for this new vision of public education to come to fruition, after we've dreamed it up and decided that it's something we want to do, we have to remain committed to monitoring implementation. That means engaging with our boards of education, engaging with our blueprint implementation coordinators and our state legislators and local leaders so that the blueprint remains fully funded over time, so that we actually get to the 10th year of this implementation that we've dreamed up and can look around and ask ourselves whether we've really achieved world-class schools. Now, I believe that the opportunity is there, and I also believe that we have to remember the blueprint is just that. It's a starting ground. It tells us what the framework could look like, and it is up to each and every single one of us to be a part of the process of creating that world-class vision for public schools.
Chris, Shamoyia, thank you both for that great conversation. We're going to close, as we always do, by sharing today's action items, things you can do today to help build a stronger Maryland. Chris, what's your action item for our listeners?
For anyone who's interested in supporting greater economic security for Maryland families, you can connect with the Tax Credits for Maryland Families Coalition. Go to taxcreditsformdfamilies.org to sign up for the email list and hear more about efforts to protect and expand Maryland's working family tax credits.
And Shamoyia, how about you?
So I would be remiss if I did not say go to strongschoolsmaryland.org, sign up for our email list. We send out a monthly newsletter called The Worksheet that includes updates on blueprint implementation at the state level, local level, employment opportunities so you can actually be a part of the work, and also just really good tidbits and a lot of funny jokes. While you're on our website, head on over to the Teams of 10 page and see if you've got what it takes to become a team leader. How will you know? If you have a few people that you connect with and talk about issues that you care about, you might be equipped to be a team leader. If you care about educational equity, if you value lifelong learning, collective impact, civic engagement, and justice, you might be ready to join the ranks of Marylanders who are engaging in the creation of a world-class system of public education that serves everyone, period. StrongSchoolsMaryland.org. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, or on our next team leader call. We hope to see you soon.
Thank you again to my guests today, Shamoyia Gardiner, Executive Director of Strong Schools Maryland, and Chris Meyer, Research Analyst with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. You can find podcast archives and references from this episode at mdeconomy.org/policy-lowdown. While you're there, you can sign up for our email list. You can also find the Maryland Center on Economic Policy at MD Economy on Twitter and Instagram, and MD Economic Policy on Facebook. See you next time.
Those that would stand up, call our nation back toward justice and righteousness are often bashed or labeled as socialist and unpatriotic.